So thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to be having this conversation with you. And I think we could get right into it right now. So my name is Mosunmola Ogunmolaji, and I'm here with...
That's the neatest name I've ever heard. What a great name.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually from Nigeria anyway, so that's why the name is...
Don't let anyone let you change it, okay?
Okay. Thank you so much. So
that's good of us.
So yeah, I'm actually on this interview with Donovan. Carter is also like a research assistant at the... We're both research assistants at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And today is April 1st, 2022. And we're so excited to be doing this interview with Dr. Bernard Machen. And I think we could start. So Dr. Machen, could you kindly introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background.
Surely. I'm retired from the University of Florida, where I served as president from 2004 through 2014. And I serve as president emeritus. I do some different things for the university. The purpose for today's meeting has to do with Oak Hammock, which is a facility that really came online during my tenure. And I was blessed also to have both of my parents live at Oak Hammock. So I know a fair amount about it personally. And I'm sure you know now there are lots of university people who live out there that most of whom I do know.
Thank you very much. I think you already mentioned something we're going to get to much later in the interview about your parents living in the Oak Hammock. So could you tell us a little bit about, how you came up with that decision and why the Oak Hammock?
Well, I think I mentioned I came here in January of 2004. And I have a brother and a sister who live in Atlanta and San Antonio. My parents were in a small town in Alabama, and they were experiencing what we all agreed was very poor health care. And they were in the state of their lives where they were not able to live alone any longer. So frankly, my brother, my sister, and I had a meeting, and they voted 2-1 that my parents would come to stay with me in Gainesville, where I had just lived. And the reason for that, of course, is that Oak Hammock was just opening up very near the campus. So in 2004, we moved my parents here. Interesting to me, at least, they were the second and third occupants of what is known as assisted living. You know that the CCRC has a independent, assisted, skilled, and memory. And so they were some of the very first people to move into what is known as the assisted living part of Oak Hammock. They subsequently died while in skilled nursing there after being here for 5 years. It was a wonderful experience, so I have very strong and positive feelings about Oak Hammock.
Sorry about the loss. I think I would just want to take us back into a little bit about yourself, because we know that we are doing the interview for the Oak Hammock Oral History Project. But if you could just give us a little bit about yourself, where were you born, like your career, how did you start your career and all of that, we would really appreciate that.
Surely. I'm a son of the South. I was born in Mississippi when my parents were there during the Second World War. Actually, my father was in the military. I grew up in the Middle West in St. Louis, went to Vanderbilt University undergraduate. I am a dentist by training. I went to dental school in St. Louis, subsequently got a PhD, and spent the rest of my career in academics. I was at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of Michigan, University of Utah, where I served as president. And then I came here to the University of Florida as president in 2004.
Thank you so much. So you just mentioned that you came to the University of Florida in 2004. Prior to coming to the University of Florida, did you have or on arrival at the University of Florida, did you hear about how the idea of the Oak Hammock retirement community, how did it start up? How did it spring up? Did you hear about that?
Yeah, actually, as you are going to find out if you haven't already, the project, it wasn't that old. I think it was first talked about in the late 90s, 97 or so, by some retired faculty here at the university. And they basically persuaded the administration, Dr. Lombardi, with whom you're going to talk, I think, next week, to get interested in a CCRC, which was still in the late 90s, a relatively new concept, especially in conjunction with a university. So it was really Dr. Lombardi and his vice president for advancement, Paul Robel, with whom I think you're also going to talk, who crystallized the idea of helping Oak Hammock get started as a 501c3, not supported by the university, but affiliated with the university. So when I came here, it had been conceptualized, had been built, and really was just opening up in 2004 when I came. And like I said, my parents came that year as well and were some of the first occupants of Oak Hammock.
So thank you very much for that answer. So in 2004, so let's start from there anyway. What were some of like the early issues that were faced by the retirement community?
Well, it was interesting. Oak Hammock is not officially part of the university, although it was sort of birthed by I would say the University of Florida was like the godfather of Oak Hammock. And as such, the president of the university appointed 5 members of the board that started at Oak Hammock. So when I came here, I didn't know anything about Oak Hammock until we started looking into it for my parents. But I would get calls from people in the community asking me questions about Oak Hammock as if I was the president of Oak Hammock. And so a lot of the questions are, what's it going to be like? What's it going to cost to get in there? Who's it going to be available to? And just what I call operational questions. So I quickly realized that even though I didn't have a direct involvement with Oak Hammock, the university and I were going to be affiliated with it from the get-go. So for the fact that I got to appoint 5 members of the board, we were able to have people that were part of the University of Florida community, but also part of the greater Gainesville community. And they themselves began the task of figuring out all the operating principles of a CCRC, which we had never had before in this town.
So you mentioned that people were concerned about the cost and how to, get signed up and, become residents at the Oak Hammock. So what was your response to those issues, or how were those issues addressed?
Well, as I said, I initially didn't know anything, so I took it upon myself to learn how it worked and all that. But fortunately, we had a good management team out at Oak Hammock, and they took over the idea, and we had plenty of space. Right now, if you talk to people about Oak Hammock, the problem is there's not enough space for people to get into Oak Hammock, which is a testament to its success. But back in those days, the questions were, is it going to be a success? Will we have enough occupants to fill it up and to pay the bills and so on and so forth? We didn't know. We knew that a lot of people in Florida retired here, but there wasn't a CCRC in this area. So we just didn't know if it was going to catch on. And frankly, around the country, it's not the case any longer, but at that time, CCRCs affiliated with universities were relatively uncommon. So we were almost in new territory. We had this assumption that a lot of people from the university would like to live in Oak Hammock. And in fact, we had originally thought that only people from the university would want to live in Oak Hammock. As it turns out now, if you look at the census today, I would say half or more of the people who live out there had nothing to do with the University of Florida. But we didn't know that in '04. The big issue in '04 was, are we going to have enough people choose to live there, pay the cost, and then have the thing be viable?
So what I'll
Okay, what time tomorrow?
what strategies were used to kind of ensure that Oak Hammock started off smoothly, if that question makes sense?
Well, it was a hope and a prayer, to be honest with you. We, as I said, we're in new territory. I was new to the administration. The previous administration had been the one who sort of fostered the idea and brought it forward. And so we were just trying to figure out, well, what is needed and how do we respond to those needs? Fortunately, the board of directors was very helpful, and the management of Oak Hammock was equally helpful, and we sort of brought it up together.
Yeah.
You mentioned the board of directors. Can you recall like members of that board, like the names?
Are you kidding? I can't remember who I had lunch with last week, to be honest with you. But I do know, Chris, come on. Excuse me just a minute. Chris, I can't hear. My wife's in the hall up here. I did talk to Mr. Robel, and he's going to have a lot of the technical information for you next week when you talk to him.
Okay. So also another question. As during the earlier stage, what was like the selling point for the Oak Hammocks? Because you mentioned earlier on, like at that stage, people were just really hopeful that the project was going to be a successful one. So what were like the major things that kind of made it attractive to people at that early stage?
While Oak Hammock was not financially the responsibility of the University of Florida, we embraced the idea of an affiliation with Oak Hammock, hoping that people who came there would like to be involved in the university. And as you know, occupants of Oak Hammock can now participate in educational courses. They can take classes. They can participate in athletic events. We have students from the university who work on internships at Oak Hammock. So we really pushed, and we thought it was a selling point, and I still think it's a selling point today, this relationship that people who are at Oak Hammock could have, if they wanted, with the University of Florida. And that has proved to be a good tie-in for everybody.
I also want to ask about kind of what you mentioned ILR, like kind of that initiative. Do you recall kind of what, I guess, have you been to any ILR events, and which have been most fruitful for you? I say, or which have you heard?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about your perspective on ILR, the Institute of Learning and Retirement, and maybe if you recall any specific events that you remember fondly, or that you hear about a lot, or professors that come.
I didn't actively participate in that except through my parents and Oak Hammock. And I watched my parents move in. I watched them try to make new friends. Interestingly, my mother started the library and assisted living. They didn't have any library resources over in that area. She is an ex-school teacher, and she was a sort of an organizational person. And so she organized what I think is still in existence, is that a lending library over in assisted living. She also contacted the local ministers, and they started having church services at Oak Hammock over in assisted living. So the community and the university sort of started bonding with Oak Hammock in different sorts of ways. And there were a lot of different nodes of contact that made all that happen. my observation was mainly through watching my own parents.
You on the question on the relationship between Oak Hammock and the community, aside this one that you've mentioned, are there other ways that the community or the Oak Hammock community kind of relates with the Gainesville community?
Yeah, well, we didn't actually do it. It sort of took over generically. The people who came to Oak Hammock, many wanted more things involved in the community than just the university, and they would seek it out. The example I gave of my mother seeking out some of the preachers in the area and getting them to come to Oak Hammock. But those are the main things that I'm familiar with. As the only CCRC, the Villages is another retirement center that's in Gainesville. It's a little different than Oak Hammock, but it turns out that retirement living has become a major industry in Gainesville, somewhat because of Oak Hammock and the other entities that have built up around there. So the community is very much involved in helping retirees settle into this community.
As the president of UF for, I think, about 10 years, if I'm correct, how did you, you must have experienced the growth of, you watch Oak Hammock literally grow from, from the initial, what you used to be in 2004 to 2014 when you kind of stopped being the president of UF. So what was that progression for you, the progression you experienced as regards to the development of the Oak Hammock?
Well, it was a very much a learning experience for me because, like I said, I had no experience with this before. And coming in 2004, I mentioned the concern on our side was, is it going to work? Will it be financially feasible? Because the university had no financial involvement, but we were sort of bystanders, but very interested in having it happen. So watching it develop through people choosing to move there was the first thing I remember about my time here. Then I started getting calls from clients who live there. Well, why can't you do this? And why there were people who wanted different kinds of activities, primarily at Oak Hammock. And because the president of the university was listed on the board, they decided that I was the president of Oak Hammock, which of course I wasn't. But we ended up having a bunch of operational issues that were sometimes referred to the university, but all the time referred back to the board of directors of Oak Hammock, and they would work things out. Like the meals, every place you go, everybody's concerned about food. And for a while, food was an issue. But it became obvious to everyone that we had to have a good food service. The clients would not stand for it. So we worked on the food service. Initially, they wouldn't let people from assisted living come over to the main dining area. That was, of course, of some friction, and we worked things like that out. I would call them, in retrospect, minor operational issues. The biggest one, of course, being the financial stability, but it became clear within a couple of years that Oak Hammock was going to make it financially.
So I want to take you back a little bit to, you mentioned other retirement community within the Gainesville area. You mentioned the Village. What makes the Oak Hammock stand out when compared to other retirement community, not just within Gainesville, but within the US generally?
Yeah, well, I don't want to talk bad about other communities, but I would just say that Oak Hammock has skilled nursing as part of its array of programs. The Villages does not have that. And so, as was the case with my parents and many people who choose to finish their lives in a CCRC, most will sooner or later need some kind of skilled nursing capability. So that's a special aspect of Oak Hammock. We also have a memory unit for people who have memory problems, which are common with the older generation. which makes us very special. But I think the thing that makes us most special is our tie to the university. That when you talk to people who choose to move here from other states, they will tell you that they looked at CCRCs in other places and they were attracted partly by the state of Florida, which is a nice place to retire, but also by the fact that the Oak Hammock community has a strong affiliation with the University of Florida.
So based on this conversation, basically it's the affiliation with the university that is like the key thing to most people. And I'm also going to ask you a question about, if you would ever consider being a resident at the Oak Hammock.
I have my deposit in. Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it's not so easy to move into Oak Hammock. It used to be there was lots of space and you could move in right away. Right now, there's a waiting list to move into Oak Hammock. And so if you don't get on the waiting list, when your time comes up, they may not have a spot for you. So yes, my wife and I have our deposit at Oak Hammock, and we think that someday, even though we're not in any hurry to go, that we would like to live out there.
Thank you.
So one thing I've noticed that a lot of people really enjoy when we've conducted our interviews with residents of Oak Hammock is more than I anticipated, they really love the ability to go to sporting events. I had no clue that, of course, I always know that Gator football was a huge thing. I'm not originally from Florida. I'm originally from Georgia. So,
okay. We have to watch people from Georgia,
That's true. Our family make jokes at me all the time, crack jokes at me all the time. But it's been fascinating to hear how many residents really love going to not only just football, but like volleyball games and even like tennis matches or baseball games. And I wanted to, I guess, ask since Oak Hammock residents are kind of an extension of the university community, let's see, where's my question? It seems that there was an intentional effort made to have residents feel included. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. I get your point. It's an interesting concept and like you say, it's not something you'd normally think about would be that way, but it is. I've never talked to anybody in athletics about whether we solicited people to come. I do know that right outside the O'Connell Center where the basketball plays, the Oak Hammock bus is parked there every game. So they bring residents over to the game and wait for them and take them back. And I think the bus goes to baseball and softball and tennis and everything else. The reality is when you are retired, having crossed that threshold myself about 5 years ago, you're looking for interesting things to do with your time. And actually, as you well know, even though a Georgian, Florida sports are really pretty good across the board. And it's very competitive. The Southeastern Conference is very enjoyable. So for a relatively small amount of money, you can become very involved in, I know people at Oak Hammock who have season tickets in baseball, go to all the baseball games. It's a little harder to get season tickets in basketball and football, but still people do all that. But it's also quite enjoyable to be around young people participating in sports. That's a very uplifting thing for us old people, and so it's not surprising to me that the residents are attracted to the sports programs, because I think it's a great way to develop other interests.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if I could just go a little bit into like the experiences of your parents while they were living at the Oak Hammock. What do you think they found quite interesting to do at the Oak Hammock? What was their favorite thing to do at the Oak Hammock?
Well, they have a nice recreational facility there. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's very well used by the residents, and it's like having your own health club right inside the facility. And I know that lots of people take advantage of that. They have organized social events. They'll have cocktail hours so that people can walk to a meeting place inside of Oak Hammock and have a chance to meet people, and then go to dinner right there at Oak Hammock. So it's almost a self-contained lifestyle if you choose to do that. My mother was a big bridge player. Well, there's lots of bridge playing going on at Oak Hammock, and they would have games 2 or 3 different times a week at different parts of the facility. So another thing that's really quite interesting is the vet school at Florida provided a support system for the animals of the residents at Oak Hammock. They would take them on walks. They would be able to get animal care out there. Again, another connection to the kind of life that you want to live, made possible by the University of Florida connection. So it's a total environment. If you didn't, I don't think you could not leave Oak Hammock, although I guess maybe you could, but you could have almost all of your life included within the confines of Oak Hammock if you so chose, huh?
Thank you for mentioning that. I actually did a tour of the Oak Hammock a couple of weeks back, and I also saw that they now have a dog park, and they also have like a memorial for people who have actually lost their dogs and all of that. They also have a very beautiful garden too as well. So I understand what you mean by, like, there's a community on its own. You have a garden, you have a dog park, you have almost like everything right within the campus. So what other questions do we have, Donovan, for Dr. Machen?
Let's see. I want to ask about, so I know of your work with the Machen Scholars, the Machen Scholarship Program, MFOS, Opportunity Scholars. This is a separate matter, but do you see how do I want to bridge these two? Do you think that eventually, the kind of the initial scholars of the MFOS program will end up in Oak Hammock, and how do you think that will, like, that a long time from now, of course, naturally a long time?
No, I hear what you say a long time, but the MFOS Scholars Program is over 15 years old. So we got people who've graduated 15, almost 13 years ago, who are now out in the workplace. What I hope for Machen Scholars is that they become successful however they want to define success. Some choose to go to New York and be big shots in New York City. Some go back to their home community and teach in the schools. All of those are successful avenues, but eventually, if they have a complete life that starts with a college education, hopefully without a lot of debt, when they get ready to retire, they'll have the option of, if they need it, of going to an Oak Hammock type facility. I can tell you it was wonderful for my parents to be able to end their life in that kind of a facility. And I would hope Machen Scholars would be at a place where they could do that if they want. As you know, if you've looked at it, it's not cheap to go to Oak Hammock. You know, there's a considerable cost, but if you spend your lifetime preparing for retirement, I think it's set up so that can happen.
Yeah, because I was going to come back to the question of cost and how affordable do you think the Oak Hammock is in terms of cost?
I think it's getting everything's expensive, but I think it is expensive. When we set it up, we had this idea that a faculty member lived and worked in Gainesville at the university and was ready to retire, could sell their house in the community and move into Oak Hammock, and then be able to make it work with their retirement income and Social Security and Medicare. I mean, and that worked in the beginning. I think with inflation and the way things have gone, that may be a push right now. You know, and unfortunately, a lot of people in this world are not able to have houses, which are ways you'd build equity and get assets. And then other people don't have retirement plans that are in the stock market. So that I think it is fair to say that there are people who would like to be at Oak Hammock who can't afford to come there. In reality, my parents couldn't afford to come there. But it's no longer the case, I don't think. But in the beginning, as I said, they had a lot of capacity that they hadn't sold. So they allowed people to come into those facilities and pay a per diem rate. So that when you come into Oak Hammock, you essentially buy your way in with a big nest egg, and then you pay a small monthly charge. For a few people like my parents who came in at the beginning, they were able just to pay a monthly charge and not have to pay the nest egg. It's almost like they were renters and not homeowners, if you understand the difference. But I think his question to me is a great one. What do we think about people 20, 30 years from now? Will Oak Hammock still be a viable place for them and not just a place for millionaires, you know? I sure hope so.
Thank you. I'm actually going to ask the question about when you eventually become a resident in the Oak Hammock. Are there any new ideas or new things you might consider introducing to the community?
No, I don't want them to even know that I was the president. I want to just be one of the quiet residents who live there and complain about the food when I don't like the food.
But I bet they will know eventually.
Yeah, it's a small town. You can run that you can't hide, you know. But I think the key is good management. We have a new director out there, which everyone that's out there says is doing a great job. We have a very active board of directors now that very much involved in the affairs of the institution. So I think it's being well run.
Yeah, I think you've answered like most of our questions already. Donovan, do you have any question coming to mind right now?
No, I don't have anything else.
I would just point you to what I understand is your meeting next week with Dr. Lombardi and Mr. Robel. They're really the ones that's got the ball rolling. So you guys bear down on them because they have lots of historical data that will be helpful in your whole history, okay?
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
finally, is there any story that you recall about the Oak Hammock that you might want to share? Anything maybe from your parents or from your own personal like encounter with residents that you might want to share with us?
The news is all good. I think of Oak Hammock as a real positive experience for me and for the university. I can tell you from my parents, it made the last 5 years of their lives, and they both lived approximately 5 years after they moved in there. It made a very smooth transition from independent living to the time when they passed on. So it sold me by watching how it took care of my parents. And I think a lot of people have had the same experience. We're lucky to have it in this community. And frankly, I think the university is lucky to have it as part of its constellation of programs.
Absolutely. All right, last question for me. What was the most, this is a broader question on the presidency, on your tenure as president of the university. What would you say has been the most fulfilling change to see in UF, like kind of throughout your tenure there?
I think the diversity factor, the Machen scholars, the idea that a cohort of young people who had all the academic credentials and yet couldn't come here because of money, that really hurt me when I came and found out about it. So we now take 400 Machen scholars every year. So that, and we have over 5,000 graduates. And to see those young people and to be able to keep in touch with them and hear about their lives and now that they have children and things like that, you can't imagine how satisfying that is for me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. When I first heard of the initiative, I was incredibly impressed because I've never heard of something on such a large scale from a public university. So it's really,
I mean, you know, the Ivies like to talk about what they do, and then when you ask them what they do, oh, we took 25, or we took 50, or we took 100, and then they ask me how many we take, and I smile and say we take 400 every year. Yep.
Exactly.
That's a large number. So,
thank you for interviewing me. I enjoyed it very much. You guys are great.
Thank you so much. I know, like, throughout the interviews, we've talked about your parents, and I would like if you could just give us their names so we could kind of have that on record.
My parents' name?
Yes.
My father's name was Bernard, like me, Bernard Machen. And my mother's name was Eleanor Machen, Eleanor. And as I said, they moved straight into assisted living. When they moved here, my mother couldn't walk. She'd been in nursing home and she had had no therapy. She had lots of drugs. Getting her into Oak Hammock, they cleaned up her medications. We got her good health care, and she lived happily for a long period of time.
That's beautiful to hear.
Yeah, so happy to hear about that the facilities were actually what she needed at that point.
Exactly, it was great. Yes. Yeah.
So we don't have any other question at this point, so we'd like to thank you for your time and for agreeing to do this interview with us. And if you have any other final questions or comments, you could, anything you would like to say.
I'm going to tell Dr. Ortiz how good you are. You guys are the best. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
He's my neighbor, by the way, so I see him a lot. Oh, yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.